The studio lights blazed over the glossy floor. It was a global broadcast. Leaders from every continent had gathered for a televised summit on African economic reform and global cooperation. The energy was intense. Viewers from over 70 countries were watching live. On one side sat U.S. President Donald Trump, arms folded, lips tight. On the other, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, calm, eyes focused, posture straight. The moderator's voice was smooth. President Trump, you've been vocal about your concerns. Would you like to comment? Trump smirked, leaned forward, and the moment millions feared happened. He looked straight at Ibrahim and said, "Frankly, this guy, he's selfish, arrogant. He thinks leading a country means grabbing attention, not results." Gasps filled the room. The camera zoomed in on Ibrahim's face. No anger, no outburst, just silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any insult. But the tension kept building. Everyone was expecting a reaction, a counterattack, something. But Traoré didn't move. And that silence? It hurt more than any words. Little did Trump know that silence was just the beginning of a storm he wouldn't survive. News outlets across the globe clipped that moment. Trump calls Traoré selfish on live TV. The internet exploded. Hashtags trended in seconds. But inside that studio, time felt frozen. Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. Sitting there in his traditional Sahelian tunic, eyes forward, hands folded. He looked like a man carrying generations on his shoulders. A producer whispered into the moderator's earpiece, "Let it roll. This is history." Trump, clearly expecting a fiery reaction, leaned back smugly. But something else happened. In the second row behind the panelists, Senator Elizabeth Warren quietly rose from her seat. No one noticed at first, until she stepped onto the platform. A hush fell over the room. Trump squinted. "Elizabeth?" he said, almost laughing. "What are you doing?" But Warren wasn't smiling. She looked directly at Trump, then at the cameras. And with a voice calm but burning, she said, "You just embarrassed this entire room. And the whole world knows it." The air turned electric. Trump blinked. Elizabeth wasn't finished. She walked closer to the mic, and what she revealed next would make grown men cry. Elizabeth Warren's voice broke the silence, not loud, but sharp. "This man," she said, pointing toward Traoré, "has faced more death threats than you've faced real consequences." Trump rolled his eyes. But Warren didn't stop. He leads a nation that was forgotten by global powers, a country where children walk miles for water, where foreign hands tried to control its gold. And he said, "No more." A few in the crowd started nodding. She continued, "While you were playing golf, he was standing in the rain, holding the hands of mothers who just lost sons to terrorist attacks. You call that selfish?" The room was pin-drop silent. Then slowly, camera feeds switched to the studio audience, many in tears. A young African woman clutched her mouth, visibly shaking. Ibrahim still hadn't spoken, but something in his eyes shimmered. He wasn't just holding back anger. He was holding back pain. Warren walked to him, gently placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "Captain Traoré doesn't need to respond. The world is already listening." Trump tried to speak again, but no words came out, not a single one. Elizabeth Warren turned to the cameras and held up something small in her hand, a photo. It was wrinkled, torn slightly at the edges. The lights above caught it just right as she raised it up. "This," she said gently, "is a photo I carry everywhere. It's of a boy named Salifu." She paused. 6 years old, shot in the leg while fetching water with his mother in northern Burkina Faso. She died protecting him. Gasps echoed across the room. Trump looked confused. Warren continued, her voice now trembling. When I visited Wahiguya last year, Salafu was in the hospital. Bandaged, hungry. He couldn't walk, but guess who visited him? She turned and looked at Ibrahim. He came, quietly. No cameras, no press. He sat by Salafu's bedside, held his tiny hand, and promised him he'd build a new school near their village. Ibrahim blinked, his jaw clenched. Warren looked back at Trump. You called him selfish? That boy, that mother, they would disagree. The audience didn't clap. Not yet. They were still too stunned, still processing the truth they never expected to hear on live TV. The image of the boy, Salafu, still lingered in everyone's mind. It wasn't just a photo anymore. It was a wound. Elizabeth Warren stepped back, lowering the photo slowly. Trump shifted in his seat, crossing his arms, but said nothing. For once, the former president looked unsure. The moderator tried to regain control. Thank you, Senator. Perhaps we can now return to... But the audience didn't move. One woman in the third row, a journalist from Belgium, wiped tears from her cheek. Another, a U.S. Army veteran seated near the back, stood up suddenly and said, "Why are we still allowing these attacks on honest leaders?" The cameras captured everything. Then came a sound rarely heard in rooms like these. A sob. A quiet, broken cry from somewhere in the crowd. Then another, and another, until the room wasn't silent anymore. It was morning. Not because Ibrahim had spoken, but because he hadn't. And sometimes, a man's silence reveals more pain than 1,000 speeches. Traoré bowed his head. And for the first time, even his enemies started to wonder, what has this man endured in silence? The cameras zoomed in. The tension was unbearable. Then, slowly, Captain Ibrahim Traoré adjusted his mic. He hadn't spoken since Trump insulted him. Now every soul in the room leaned forward. He looked straight ahead. Not at Trump. Not at the moderator. Not at Warren. But at the camera. At the world. And softly he said, "I have buried more children than I can count. Not because I failed them, but because the world forgot them." A sharp inhale echoed through the room. They weren't my people. They were our people. Children of the world. And no, I don't need applause for loving them. His voice cracked slightly. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here because every time I close my eyes, I see the mothers who scream with empty arms. And I will fight for them, even if I stand alone. He paused, turned to Trump. And if standing up for them makes me arrogant in your eyes, then I pray more men become arrogant. A moment of silence, then applause. Not from just the audience, but from the camera crew, the translators, even security. As the applause faded, Ibrahim sat back quietly. He didn't smile. He didn't bask in the praise. He slowly reached up and adjusted his collar. And for a brief second, the camera caught a mark on his shoulder, a deep healed scar. A young reporter watching from the audience leaned over to her cameraman and whispered, "That's from the ambush in 2019, isn't it?" It was. That day, Traoré had been escorting villagers during a surprise attack in the north. Instead of fleeing, he shielded a boy named Kudbi with his body. He nearly bled out. But the world never saw that headline. Trump leaned forward, trying to regain control. He plays the hero, but it's just good PR. He's no Mandela. The words were meant to bite. But this time, they landed on deaf ears. Because the story had already shifted. Elizabeth Warren looked at Trump like he'd said the most ignorant thing on earth. And then a voice came from the back of the studio. "Actually, he's the reason I'm alive." Everyone turned. A woman in a white dress stood, tears in her eyes. And what she said next shook the room. Her voice was soft, her accent unmistakably Burkinabe. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her eyes locked on Trump. "But I must speak." Security started forward, but Warren raised her hand to stop them. The woman took a deep breath. "My name is Aicha. My husband was a school teacher in Barcelona. Terrorists came in the night. They were looking for anyone who taught girls." She paused. The room went quiet again. "They shot him in front of our door. I ran with my daughter. I was barefoot. My hands were covered in his blood." You could hear sniffles in the studio. "Ibrahim Traoré found us. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for the cameras. He brought us food, shoes. And when I couldn't speak, he sat with me in silence for hours. He stayed until my daughter smiled again." Her voice cracked. "That man you called selfish, he mourned with me. And today my daughter is in school because of him." She turned to Ibrahim and whispered, "Merci, mon frère." Ibrahim looked down. Trump leaned back. The studio sat still, and then the moderator's voice returned, but his tone had completely changed. The moderator cleared his throat. There was no laughter now, no sarcasm, just a heavy, thoughtful pause. "Mr. Trump," he said carefully, "do you still believe Captain Traoré is selfish?" Trump blinked. He looked around. For once, the confidence in his eyes was gone. He tried to speak, but his lips only parted slightly. No words came. The audience waited. Cameras zoomed in. Then, trying to regain footing, Trump chuckled dryly. "I've never heard of a leader doing charity work instead of fixing their country." But it fell flat. The moderator leaned in. "You mean to say, saving lives is not fixing a country?" Trump looked away. Ibrahim Traoré finally turned toward him, with no hate in his eyes, just quiet, unshakable, dignified. "Mr. Trump," Ibrahim said gently, "sometimes the biggest change starts with a child smiling again. You may not understand that, but in my country, it matters." A tear rolled down the moderator's cheek. He wasn't the only one. In that moment, the world stopped seeing Traoré as just a leader. They saw him as something much more. And Trump, he had nothing left to say. The moderator looked shaken. The air in the studio felt heavy. Then Elizabeth Warren pulled out something else, a folded piece of paper. "I want to read something," she said. "It's not mine. It's a letter from a soldier." She unfolded the page and began to read. "To the President of Burkina Faso, you don't know me. I served under you during the ambush in Dori. I was scared. I was bleeding. I thought I'd die in that sand. But you ran back, twice, to pull us out. I watched you lift wounded men with your own arms. You didn't have to. You were already a captain. But you came anyway. I'm alive because of you. You gave us hope when we had nothing." By the time she finished, the entire studio was quiet. Trump didn't move. He couldn't. The world had just heard what the cameras never showed. Ibrahim didn't speak. His eyes were misty. Because the soldier who wrote that letter? He died just 3 weeks after sending it. And Ibrahim never forgot his name. Suddenly, the studio lights flickered. For a moment, everything went dark. The audience gasped. Then emergency lights clicked on. Producers rushed around, but the broadcast continued. The moderator announced, "Technical difficulties. We're staying live." Elizabeth Warren stood quietly, glancing at Ibrahim. He remained seated, hands folded, staring at the ground. Someone whispered, "Should we pause the program?" But Warren answered, "No. This is what the world needs to see." In the low lighting, a cameraman moved closer to Traoré. You could see the sweat on his brow, the pain in his eyes. A member of the press suddenly asked a question from the crowd. "Captain Traoré, how do you keep going?" Ibrahim looked up, and in the softest voice he said, "I carry their names." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, worn, fragile, faded. I write down every name of someone we've lost, to war, to hunger, to silence. When I feel tired, I read them, and I remember why I must keep going. The lights came back on, but no one noticed, because every eye in the room was already glowing with tears. The light returned to full brightness, but Trump's confidence didn't. He sat stiffly, staring at the notebook in Traoré's hands. No one applauded, no one booed. They just stared. Elizabeth Warren, sensing the moment, leaned toward Trump and asked a simple question. "Have you ever carried names, Mr. Trump?" Trump looked stunned. I've helped many people," he said, fumbling. "I've built businesses. I've created jobs. You people don't understand success." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Warren didn't blink. "Success isn't a trophy. It's a child fed, a life saved." Then, for the first time, Ibrahim turned fully toward Trump. No anger, just truth. "I don't carry power," he said. "I carry pain, and that pain is my responsibility. It humbles me." Trump went silent. For the first time since the show began, he looked lost, not attacked, just exposed. A young woman in the front row whispered, "He came here to crush him, but he's been undone by kindness." The moderator cleared his throat. "Let's take a short break," he said. But no one stood up, because this wasn't a debate anymore. It had become something far deeper. The camera caught something strange. Ibrahim Traoré, frozen. His eyes had drifted, not to Trump, not to the crowd, but to the ground. Elizabeth noticed. She whispered, "Captain, are you okay?" He nodded slowly. Then, for the first time, he told a story no camera had ever recorded. "I was 27, he said. "I was stationed near the border. There was a village raid. I got there too late." He paused. Everyone leaned in. There was a little girl hiding in the corner of a burnt house. She had blood on her dress, and a baby brother in her arms. A woman in the audience gasped softly. She wouldn't speak, for hours. But before I left, she whispered one word. He looked up. "Don't leave." His voice cracked. "I carried them both to safety. I made sure they ate. I made sure they got shelter. But I've never forgotten that voice. I still hear it." The room fell silent again, because everyone knew that wasn't just a story. It was the reason he leads, and the reason he will never give up. The moderator looked visibly shaken. Even the camera operators paused, their hands trembling behind the lenses. Trump sat stone-faced, but not defiant, distant. Elizabeth Warren turned to him. "Mr. Trump," she said gently, "would you like to respond?" He looked down. For once, he had no comeback. Then he muttered, "I didn't know." It was the first time in the entire broadcast that he sounded human. Warren nodded. "That's the point. You didn't want to." The audience stared. Some shook their heads. Others simply wiped their tears. Ibrahim Traoré took a breath and spoke again, not to Trump, but to the world. "You don't have to be African to understand suffering. You just have to care." That line echoed. It didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like truth. A journalist from France leaned into her mic and whispered, "This isn't a summit. It's a mirror." People watching from around the world began sharing clips. He leads with scars, not ego. Ibrahim is what leadership looks like. And then, in that same studio, something truly unexpected happened. Trump looked away, and someone in the crowd whispered, "He just lost." The moderator broke the silence. "We've never had a summit like this," he said quietly. "Not with this much truth." But it wasn't over. Elizabeth Warren turned to Ibrahim with tears in her eyes. "There's something I brought for you." She reached into her folder and pulled out a small velvet box. She opened it. Inside was a pin,
Faded gold, a dove holding a branch. "My mother gave this to me before she died," Warren said. "She said it belonged to my grandfather, who marched beside Dr. King." She walked over, hands shaking. "I believe this belongs to you now." The whole room stood, even Trump. Ibrahim hesitated. "I can't accept this," but Warren placed it gently on his chest. "You already have," she said. The applause was quiet at first, almost reverent. Then it grew and grew until it shook the studio. Tears streamed down cheeks. Even seasoned journalists sobbed openly, because what they saw wasn't just a leader being honored. They saw a wound being healed, between continents, between generations, between people. And for the first time that night, Ibrahim Traoré smiled, a soft, tired, grateful smile.
The studio was still echoing from the applause when a young intern rushed up to the moderator with a flash drive. "Sir," he whispered, "you need to see this." The moderator hesitated, then plugged it in. Seconds later, the screen behind the panel lit up. A shaky, grainy video began to play. It was from a cell phone. The scene, a remote Burkina Faso village. A girl, no older than 9, was crying beside the body of her father. Smoke curled in the background. Then, through the crowd, Traoré arrived. No guards, no camera crew, just him. He knelt beside the girl, gently wiped her tears, and whispered something in her ear. The crowd in the studio went dead quiet. Then the video zoomed in and caught the moment the girl stopped crying. She smiled, a broken smile full of pain, but also of hope. The screen faded to black. A woman in the audience faintly whispered, "My God, he's been carrying all of this, alone." Trump stared at the screen, then lowered his head. The video had done what no speech could. It showed a man who led with love. As the crowd tried to process what they had seen, the moderator cleared his throat and faced the panel. "I want to end this night with one final question," he said. "And I want only Captain Traoré to answer it." Ibrahim looked up, steady as ever. "If the world turned its back on you again," the moderator asked softly, "would you still fight for it?" The room froze. A long pause. Then Traoré replied, "Even if the world turns away, I will keep fighting. Because my people are still watching. Because that little girl still needs someone to believe. And because real leadership doesn't ask for applause, it demands sacrifice." His voice didn't tremble. It carried through the room like thunder in silence. People cried openly now. Cameras captured journalists, soldiers, even rival leaders wiping their eyes. Trump remained silent, but his face had changed. He no longer looked like a man who won anything, because he hadn't. The moderator turned to the audience, and for the first time in the summit's history, everyone stood, not to clap, but to honor a man who didn't raise his voice, but raised a nation. Ibrahim stood slowly. He turned to the audience, to the cameras, to the millions watching. He took the mic and said just one final thing. "I don't need the world to praise me. I just need one child, somewhere in the dark, to know I did not forget them." That's when it happened. The translator couldn't finish. His voice cracked, and tears fell on the script in his hands. The broadcast crew, usually hidden in the shadows, came forward, clapping. A woman whispered, "He's the president we all wish we had." Elizabeth Warren gently touched his shoulder again. "You didn't just win the argument tonight," she said, tears in her eyes. "You changed hearts." The camera zoomed out slowly, a sea of people, standing, crying, hands over hearts. Trump? He quietly walked off stage. No one followed him, because the story now belonged to Ibrahim Traoré, the man who came in silence and left the world in tears. If this story touched you even a little, if it made you cry or made you feel something real for the first time in a long time, Please like this video. Drop a comment below, just one word, respect, to show the world that men like Ibrahim Traoré deserve to be seen. And if you want more real stories like this, subscribe now, not just for content, but for hope.